All right, boys and girls, breaking news about UFC 311. This will be the first pay-per-view in 2025, January 18th. So UFC President Dana White took to social media just moments ago to announce this card, or actually two bouts at the top of it, one of which was kind of rumored up there, but now we have official confirmation. So if you haven't heard, I'm going to look at my notes here. January 18th at the Intuit Dome. By the way, if you don't follow NBA basketball, the Intuit Dome is this brand new facility for the LA Clippers, made by Steve Ballmer. It's a marvel of technology. Separate conversation for a separate time. But in any case, we had kind of heard that it was going to be Islam Makhachev taking on Arman Tsarukyan, which, by the way, is a rematch from their first fight. We'll talk about that in just a second. That is now confirmed, obviously. And your co-main event, Merab Dvalishvili taking on Umar Nurmagomedov for the bantamweight title. Now, you might be asking, I'm going to pull it up here, when Ramadan is. Ramadan in 2025 will be February 28th to March 29th. So they're squeezing this fight in, even though Merab just fought at Noche UFC before Ramadan. I don't know if to accommodate necessarily Umar Nurmagomedov, although partly that they're doing that, but I think also they just needed another big title fight on that card. So let's talk about everything that we know. First of all, let's actually start a little bit with that co-main event if we can. I'm actually I won't say very surprised. I'm a little surprised. According to UFC President Dana White, Merab stormed into the UFC offices demanding that they make the fight because he was tired of hearing Umar talk, and then they called Umar in the middle of the night in Dagestan, and he said yes. So the fight is going to be made. The fight is apparently signed, sealed, delivered. Whatever the story is of the origin, it's now booked, according to UFC President Dana White. And what an awesome, awesome fight this is. Now, we all know the story. Merab did not, at a bare minimum, you can make an argument, did he want to fight Umar? These things are always a function of timing, money, you name it. He didn't want to fight him next. That part was pretty clear. But given some of the alternatives about what was happening, this is just sort of where we ended up. So Merab is going to take on Umar. Umar coming off that Corey Sandhagen win, I think back from August or so. Again, we had kind of thought, well, Figgy and Jan, the winner of that, could potentially put themselves into a position. Figueiredo had a nice win streak, but it came to an end. Jan has kind of already tasted the title, and the win over Figueiredo was fantastic, but it just wasn't necessarily enough at the present moment. Umar has the Nurmagomedov name. He's undefeated, and he brings in, I think, a very, very difficult style for Merab. Merab can win that fight. Again, the guy attempted nearly 50 takedowns against Petr Yan when they fought. He has a motor like I've never seen in MMA, but there's a level of refinement and polish, both in the stand-up and in particular some of the wrestling and scrambling game of Umar Nurmagomedov that's going to be, I think, a big problem for him, or at bare minimum, a difficult challenge one way or the other. Fantastic fight, and you could get the coronation of yet another Nurmagomedov holding a title. Remember, Usman Nurmagomedov holds a title currently over in PFL or whatever you want to call that. So now you might get one returning to the UFC this whole time. And, of course, Islam Makhachev, part of the Nurmagomedov kind of empire, not sharing the name, but, part of the team. He also is our current title holder. Would be very, very impressive if they can make that happen. I don't know what the odds are on this. The news is so new, we haven't seen it yet. But that's a hell of a fight. That's a fun fight. Umar's stats to this point, if I may, very quickly, I'm going to pull this up here. Again, he has 6 wins in the UFC, undefeated. Obviously, he got a decision in the last two over Bekzat Almakhan and then Corey Sandhagen. And then before that, some of those wins aren't the most impressive necessarily, but the one over Sandhagen was pretty great. Merab is definitely the best guy he has fought up to this point, or will fight. There's no question that there's a bit of a difference there that should be acknowledged. I don't think Umar is necessarily going to run away with it. It's a competitive fight. I mean, it's a competitive fight in either direction. You've got both guys have something to offer the other one. In the case of Merab, as I mentioned, a motor like there has absolutely never been one in MMA. And Umar doesn't necessarily have that, although he is well-conditioned. But I think his ability to scramble underneath, to stop takedowns and strike on the feet could be a bit of a problem. However, I'm going to say it one more time. He has not fought a guy as good as Merab, just matter-of-factly. And for Merab, man, you really got to admire the grit here by this guy, really taking on, just consider his murderer's run up to this point through the UFC, right? So I could go back even further, but if we start with John Dodson, Cody Stamen, Marlon Moraes, Jose Aldo, Petr Yan, Henry Cejudo, Sean O'Malley, and now Umar Nurmagomedov. The guy is absolutely fighting the very best of his generation. Didn't look to me like he wanted the fight. Again, at least not next. I think he wanted a bit of an easier, softer landing. Figgy couldn't get it done. Jan's kind of already been there. He might get back to the top, but it's a little bit of a push. Umar was fresh. Umar was ready. They needed something on this January card. If you're just looking at like what is available on the calendar for the different divisions, this one was kind of open if they could squeeze it. Again, it's a little bit of a quick turnaround. And by the way, we all know about the turnaround from Aljamain Sterling. Didn't want to take that Sean O'Malley fight on that timeline. Did and paid for it. Here's Merab. Whether it was the public's pressure or anybody else, I don't know. But he's making a pretty quick turnaround. Remember, Merab fought all the way back in September. So let's go. It's September 14th. So let's see. Mid-October, mid-November, mid-December, mid-January. So we've already passed. It's 4 months in between. And obviously, we're now just basically a little over 5 weeks away at this point. That's a pretty quick turnaround. A great addition to that card. By the way, the rest of that card, it should be noted, is also pretty excellent, if I do say so myself. As I mentioned, we'll talk about it now. Islam Makhachev taking Arman Tsarukyan. Merab Dvalishvili taking on Umar Nurmagomedov. Then Yuri Prochazka taking on Jamal Hill. A fun little grudge match there. Jalton Almeida taking on Sergey Spivak. One of the better heavyweight fights you could make for what that's worth. Rinya Nakamura, a top prospect, taking on Muin Gafarov. Zachary Reese versus Cedric Dumas. Ricky Turcios taking on Bernardo Sopai. Grant Dawson, Carlos De Gea, that's a fun fight. And then Kevin Holland versus Rainier de Ritter. There's some bangers on that card. Carol Hossa taking Eileen Perez. Peyton Talbot taking on Jaime Barcelos. And then Johnny Walker versus Bogdan Guskov. There's a bunch of fun fights on that card. I like them a lot. So let's talk about that main event. Islam Makhachev taking on Arman Tsarukyan. Now, these two fought, let's see, all the way back in April of 2019 on the Overeem versus Oleinik card, if you can recall that. And, of course, Arman won. That was Islam Makhachev's UFC debut. That was his UFC debut. And you look at the stats in the end, neither guy landed hardly anything in the striking. 14 strikes landed significant for Islam Makhachev, just 13. But what stands out is that Arman was able to take down Makhachev just once, but he was able to get it. Relentless with the attempts, attempted 12. But Islam Makhachev threw foot sweeps. I did a whole breakdown on this on the Monday Morning Analyst at the time when I was working for MMA Fighting. Islam Makhachev did a fantastic job with this, getting 4 takedowns, having 6 minutes of control time. But the stats don't quite speak to it. Yes, Islam was better, but they were this was a 2 cats in a bag, scramble after scramble after scramble. I guess the Gamrot Tsarukyan fight would be a little bit more scrambly, but nevertheless, this one was, at least in the grappling context, Tsarukyan proved to not quite be ready for Makhachev, but he definitely showed you, whoa, this is somebody we absolutely have to pay attention to, as well as making Islam work in ways that even after that fight, not a lot of guys have made him have to do. You might ask what's going to be different this time. Makhachev is certainly much improved 5, almost 6 years later at this point. He is much more well-rounded. He can win fights multiple ways. He's gotten bouts against the very best of the division. He's fought the very best of what's been basically available to him. Yeah, he had a couple of the detours at featherweight, but against that was the number 1 guy in the sport at the time, in Alexander Volkanovski. Like, he has really become a very, very well-rounded fighter, but I think still a grappling base. I mentioned before, great in the clinch, great foot sweeps, great Uchimatas, Haraigoshis, can really make that all work from the clinch. Fantastic with submissions, beating Charles Oliveira. To me, this is still a tough fight for Tsarukyan, who is much improved. Again, fought and defeated great guys since that time. He did have the setback against Gamrot, although that was somewhat controversial. But he still, I think, is heavily reliant on getting the takedown. Even against UFC 300 against Charles Oliveira, he had to get him down and go chest to chest, had to avoid a close submission early in that fight, and his shorts kind of coming off saved him in the end. The point I'm trying to make is it still has echoes of the first fight between them, but Tsarukyan has definitely developed in that time. But to me, he hasn't radically transformed. He hasn't become something altogether different. And neither has Makhachev, but he was kind of already ahead of him anyway. This fight can be won by Tsarukyan, but if there's been one thing against him, it's not his cardio, it's not his wrestling, it's not his scrambling, it's not his athleticism, it's not his power. It has been that he focuses so much on control that he doesn't have enough like bandwidth for ground and pound. And that's going to be a tough assignment against a guy like Makhachev. And if Makhachev can stuff these takedowns, or he's the one that gets on top, I don't know how Tsarukyan wins that. Doesn't necessarily have a great guard or the ability to threaten from the back or, you name it. So it's still a lot of the same fault lines from their first fight. Very, very interesting in that regard. Going to be a hell of a contest. But, if Tsarukyan wins that, you beat the number one guy in the sport. Islam Makhachev currently still sits at pound-for-pound number one. And now you've got Nurmagomedov coming up on the co-main against Merab. As I mentioned, you've got Jamal Hill taking on Yuri Prochazka. And then on down the list, pretty good card. And I'm going to say it one more time. If you guys have not paid attention to the Intuit Dome, that is a marvel of technology in ways that maybe the Sphere itself couldn't be, but is so fun, so different, so fan-friendly, great sight lines. If you're in the LA area, this might be a good one to go to, assuming the ticket prices are going to be halfway decent, which, because it's in LA, they probably won't be. Another discussion for another time. What do you guys think of these fights? Do you like this card? I got to tell you, 2 thumbs up for me based on this card. Getting that co-main event, that is a nice addition to all of this. It really, really elevates it. UFC, once again, pulling a rabbit out of their hat, this time for UFC 311, January 18th at the Intuit Dome in Los Angeles, California. Let me know what you guys think of the fights. We'll talk more about this in the live chat tomorrow. Peace.